At one point, Gary Holt simultaneously performed for two renowned thrash metal bands. Slayer was devastated by Jeff Hanneman's passing. Exodus, stumbling in its desire to be revived. He carried two burdens without taking a day off: the weight of history and a legacy he created himself. He flew from Europe to the US, reeled in 20 Slayer songs in 48 hours, and went on stage with eyes like fire during weeks when he slept for only 3 hours every night. Nobody knew why he did it, and there were no demands or objections. Perhaps he didn't. Unlike James Hetfield, Gary Holt was never praised. Unlike Dave Mustaine, he didn't write hits that sold millions of copies. There were no media controversies or dragon tattoos on him. However, his undying devotion to metal was something that no one else possessed. No negotiating, no scams. He never made an effort to take Hanneman's spot. He decided to howl softly via a blood-soaked guitar while standing squarely in that emptiness. No performance, no compromise. And no one was able to take his place as a result. For 40 years, Gary Holt lived like a custodian of the ashes in a genre where betrayal, arguments, breakups, and walkouts are commonplace. And here is his tale: a warrior who only needed the opportunity to scream right up until the dying second, not the attention. Early life: Gary Holt was born in Richmond, California, on May 4, 1964. San Francisco Bay Area working-class suburb where the everyday rhythm of life was fashioned by steel, oil, and violence. Out of 6 children, he was the youngest. His mother took on odd jobs and housework to support the family, while his father worked in transportation. Both of his parents performed manual labor. They never experienced famine, but they also never experienced plenty. Gary soon discovered that he needed to keep quiet in order to survive in a small home with 6 children. Weakness, let alone rebellion, had no place here. He once said that his early years were filled with planned pandemonium, with neighbors fighting, siblings fighting, and police officers arriving there as if it were normal. 5 of the 6 kids got into problems, including fighting, stealing, and getting arrested. The only person who escaped jail but not the darkness was Gary. He lacked guidance and idols. He saw school as nothing more than a boring chore and a place to wait for the bell to sound. Violence was practically a regular occurrence at the Richmond high school that he went. Nobody in the family, not even Gary, believed he would ever become anything. When he picked up his first guitar in a storage shed, everything changed. There was no amplifier, no instruction manual, and the instrument was ancient and rusty with worn-out strings. However, something changed inside of him the instant he touched the fretboard. It was a sort of organized wrath rather than delight. "I wasn't passionate when I played," he once claimed. "I played because I would go crazy if I didn't." Gary taught himself everything by repeatedly playing cassette tapes and dissecting Judas Priest, AC/DC, and Motorhead riffs. No instructors, no practice areas. He used his ear to play. By memory, with the obstinacy and isolation of a child who has lost faith in the outside world. He struck each note like hot steel in that small bedroom night after night. Slow, rough, but accurate. Becoming an artist wasn't a journey. It was music as a means of survival. Gary resorted to a battered amplifier and a notebook filled with riffs, while his peers turned to drugs or gangs. He practiced by locking himself in the garage while fights broke out on the streets. He disliked crowds, had poor communication skills, and had no aspirations of being famous. But for the first time, Gary was in charge of the soundscape he created for himself. He never lost his anger, but it had strings, frets, and a purpose after that. Early career: Gary Holt never considered himself to be a member of Exodus. He described it as a purposeful mishap. He joined the band at the age of 17 in 1981 to take Tim Agnello's position as guitarist when the latter resigned for personal reasons. Insiders were aware of Exodus even though it was a relatively unknown name in the Bay Area underground scene at the time. There was nothing like what they were playing. Back then, thrash metal didn't even have a legitimate name. It was an ill-defined blend of angry metal, speeding punk, and an unbridled desire to wreak havoc. And after Gary took over, everything began to solidify. Instead of changing the band, he came to bring order to the turmoil and turn the rambling yelling into a well-planned weapon. Gary transformed tangled wrath into a cold, merciless oral attack with his razor-sharp playing and cleanly arranged chords in Exodus. He was more than just the guitarist in less than a year. He became the primary lyricist and the creator of the elements that would eventually make Exodus what it is today. Their first album, Bonded by Blood, which was recorded in 1984 but wasn't released until 1985, wasn't merely the start of Exodus. For Bay Area thrash metal, it served as an unofficial birth certificate. While Megadeth was still getting established and Metallica had just released Kill 'Em All, Bonded by Blood offered something that no other album at the time could match. A genuine feeling of danger. No refinement, no concession, no effort to win over the masses. Music was not written by Gary Holt to sell records. As though recording the last cry of those engulfed by society, he wrote. Tunes like Strike of the Beast and A Lesson in Violence were more than just tunes. They were manifestos and warnings from those who had nothing left to lose, prepared to retaliate with fresh blood and strings. However, it wasn't an easy journey. In spite of their underground renown, Exodus was frequently delayed, poorly promoted, and all but forgotten in the commercial race. Exodus faltered due to poor contracts, lineup changes, and lost opportunities, whereas Metallica flourished. Gary persisted. Conversely, being abandoned simply made him more devoted to the music he selected, harsher and angrier. He didn't write to stay current with fashion. He wrote as though he were defying pop, hair metal, and even other thrashers who were beginning to tone down their sound. Exodus put out a series of albums between 1985 and the beginning of the 1990s. 1987's Pleasures of the Flesh. 1989's Fabulous Disaster. 1990's Impact is Imminent. Each one confirmed a reality, but none were commercial explosions. It was Gary Holt who maintained the thrash flame in its most pristine state, unadulterated, and unaffected by anybody but himself. And he decided not to in a generation that was always shifting its hues. Exodus went well. Even after the blood dried up and the shouts of triumph subsided, Gary Holt was the one who remained at his station if thrash metal is a battlefield. From the very first to the very last record, he has been the lone constant in every chapter of Exodus for more than 40 years. Not only the lead guitarist, but also the band's helmsman, protector of morals and vitality. Holt solidified his indispensable position as the band's lead guitarist and main songwriter with Bonded by Blood, released in 1985. With its ferocious speed, brutal guitars, and wild lyrics, this debut was heralded in the underground as one of the foundations of thrash metal. Songs like Bonded by Blood, A Lesson in Violence, and Piranha served as the blood-stamped model for the sound that Exodus would stick to for many years. Holt wasn't a player for fame. He performed as though it were the only thing keeping him sane in a civilization that was collapsing. Then came Pleasures of the Flesh, 1987, in which Paul Bailoff was replaced by Steve Zetro Souza. Despite not being a commercial success, the album cemented Exodus's position in the Bay Area thrash wave, particularly given their tour dates with Anthrax, Slayer, and Testament, bands that were poised for international recognition. With now iconic songs like The Toxic Waltz, Fantastic Disaster, and Corruption, 1989 heralded a sea change. It was the first album by Exodus to become popular outside of the thrash genre. The band traveled throughout Europe, South America, and even had major TV appearances as part of their promotional tours. Even though it was the closest Exodus had ever been to being popular, Holt rejected all recommendations to make the songs softer for easier exposure. Impact is Imminent, 1990, marked the start of the 1990s. It was a more intricate and technically sophisticated record, but it did not have the same level of popularity as its predecessor. With songs like Thrash Under Pressure and Only Death Decides, Holt started to emphasize technical guitar work in his compositions, demonstrating that he was not just the band's master of riffs but also its complete musical architect. Force of Habit debuted in 1992. Arguably their most contentious album to date. Exodus adopted grooves, slowed down, and leaned toward alternative influences. Despite the disappointment of many admirers, Holt defended it as an essential investigation of boundaries. Nevertheless, the record was a commercial and critical failure. Exodus quietly folded in 1993 when grunge took over and thrash declined. No farewell, no announcement. Despite doing little performing, Holt continued to write music for almost 10 years. He brought Exodus back to the stage in 1997 after getting back together with Paul Bailoff and other old members. They resumed recording in 2001, but Bailoff passed away unexpectedly from a stroke. The hit was catastrophic. Nevertheless, Holt and Steve Souza continued their work, producing Tempo of the Damned in 2004. Among the best thrash records of the 21st century. Songs like Throwing Down, War Is My Shepherd, and Blacklist demonstrated that thrash was still alive and had only been waiting for someone with the guts to bring it back. A period of vigorous technical experimentation ensued. Shovel-Headed Kill Machine, released in 2005, had a more contemporary death thrash sound and a whole different roster. Holt's most violent CDs were Exhibit A, the 2007 exhibition of Atrocity, and Exhibit B, The Human Condition, 2010. Long song lengths, intricately intertwined riffs, politically charged lyrics, anti-war and anti-religion sentiments, and unusual song forms. Exodus was still full of rage and rebellion, but it had nearly broken free from conventional thrash molds. After splitting from Rob Dukes in 2014, Holt made the contentious decision to bring Zetro Souza back, which gave Blood In Blood Out lineup stability. The album became a testament to Thrash's early days when Kirk Hammett, the lead guitarist of Metallica and a former member of Exodus, made a guest appearance on Salt the Wound. Holt demonstrated that he could go back to his roots while maintaining his contemporary edge. Non grata persona, 2021. Holt's fingerprints were found on documents published during the pandemic. Under the direction of Holt and drummer Tom Hunting, it was Exodus's first entirely self-produced album. It was cold, technically complex, and had lyrics that reflected the societal turmoil in America. Despite receiving little promotion, Persona Non Grata was praised as one of the year's best thrash albums, demonstrating that Holt was still able to perform like a man fresh off the battlefield in his 50s. Gary Holt has been a part of every Exodus record, tour, and resurrection for over 40 years. He has played thousands of gigs in almost 60 countries, including crowded Oakland clubs, Wacken Open Air, Hellfest, and large-scale Latin American festivals. He kept Exodus alive, ferocious, unrelenting, and loyal to itself, even though he never managed to get it to the top of the Billboard charts. Being more well-known than anyone else wasn't the goal of success. It was about staying true to yourself and outliving everyone else. When Jeff Hanneman, Slayer's original guitarist, abruptly left the stage in 2011 after contracting necrotizing fasciitis from a spider bite, many thought it was a one-time setback, but over time, his condition deteriorated. One of the Big Four's unshakable cornerstones, Slayer, was in a limbo. Proceed or halt. In the end, they decided to go, but only with a person who could bear the weight that seemed irreplaceable. For Slayer, Gary Holt did not volunteer. As a buddy, a recognized musical opponent, and an icon who no one wanted to replace, he was actually the last person who wanted to become Jeff Hanneman's shadow. However, Holt didn't decline Kerry King's call. He had been an avid Slayer fan since the early 1980s, so he was aware of the gravity of this choice and the associated costs. Gary began traveling with Slayer on their international tours in 2011. At first, it was merely a stopgap measure, but after Hanneman died in 2013 from liver disease brought on by years of drinking, Holt was the only practical option to keep Slayer afloat without compromising its core values. The most crucial element? He didn't attempt to be Hanneman. Holt did not request that he compose new music or alter the classics to fit his own aesthetic. To prepare for Slayer's European tour, he spent less than 48 hours learning the band's full set list, which included almost 20 songs. Gary played without extraneousness, omission, or mistake from Angel of Death to Raining Blood, from South of Heaven to Disciple, all while maintaining his own tone. He respected Hanneman's spirit, which was straightforward, accurate, and brutal, rather than showing off technicality or speed. Gary Holt never yelled into a microphone or chased attention during Slayer's more than 300 performances between 2011 and 2019, but his presence prevented the band from emotionally disintegrating following their greatest setback. Holt did not write any of the songs on the only Slayer album with Holt as an official member, Repentless, 2015. The music was solely by Kerry King. The lyrics were written by Tom Araya. Holt himself made that choice. Slayer becoming Exodus Extended was not what he wanted. He wrote out of respect rather than for fame. For the fans, the band, and Hanneman. Holt divided his life into two fronts during this time. Managing Exodus, creating songs, recording albums, and dealing with lineup changes while touring the world with Slayer, from little European venues to huge festivals like Wacken, Hellfest, and Rock in Rio. Holt lived two lives and never gave up, in contrast to many of his peers who retired or slowed down. He once remarked, "I just know how to play right and play until my hands can't move," meaning that he no longer felt exhausted. Internal disagreements were inevitable, even though Gary Holt assisted Slayer in finishing their last stretch. Tom Araya desired retirement. Kerry King was determined to continue. Holt was positioned in the center. Holt silently nodded and moved away, just as he had done when Slayer announced their dissolution during the 2019 final campaign tour. He never called himself a Slayer member from start to finish, without making a sound, without expressing gratitude, and without requiring acknowledgement. Fans of Slayer were split, he noted. Hanneman was the only person some could accept. Others agreed that Holt was the only person who could assume that responsibility without devaluing it. However, nobody disputed this. After Hanneman exited the stage, Slayer wouldn't have survived for another 8 years without Gary Holt. Holt's job was to carry the burden, not to take its place. Just enough strength to keep the fire going in a band that was disintegrating, no spotlight, no hoopla. And like all he has done in Exodus, Holt did what had to be done, even if it only left him exhausted, without looking for praise. Tragic events and adversity. Gary Holt left the stage in his trademark manner as Slayer broke up at the end of 2019. No declarations, no showmanship, no tears. He closed the book on a voyage he had never planned to take, accepting it solely to maintain the flame for a departed loved one. But he didn't stop when the lights went out and Angel of Death's last riff stopped playing. There was still Exodus. And just as he had done for more than 40 years, Gary came back, this time with a band waiting for him to take the load again, a tired body, and a mind honed by hundreds of tour nights. The weight was no longer invisible this time. An epidemic struck the planet shortly after Slayer's last tour. While on tour with Exodus in Europe at the beginning of 2020, Gary and his wife Lisa became infected with COVID-19. He developed high fevers, violently coughed, had trouble sleeping, and had to postpone all of his remaining performances while under quarantine. He was compelled to quit for the first time in decades, not voluntarily, but because his body required it. Holt said. Plainly after he recovered, I used to think I didn't know what tired felt like. The infection then made me realize my limitations. Another blow came shortly after. The diagnosis of stomach cancer was made for Tom Hunting, the drummer for Exodus and Holt's comrade in arms since the 1980s. Gary didn't think twice. To wait for Tom's recuperation, he put a stop to all of his personal endeavors, started fundraising efforts, composed music at home, and postponed the recording of Persona non grata. It appeared to be a nice act to the general population. However, that was the only thing that made sense to Holt because the music would no longer be important if there were no brothers remaining. It was a period of silent, deafening strain. Gary wrote Persona non grata with the perspective of someone recovering from a global illness, caring for a dying friend, and emerging from war, not with excitement. The album didn't shout like a spectacular catastrophe or burn like the tempo of The Damned. It was haunted by a question and was colder and more bitter. How many more chances do I have to play like this is my last chance? Old cracks in Exodus started to show again at the same time. Occasionally, long-standing conflicts with former vocalist Rob Dukes returned to the news. Holt was accused by several former fans of being overbearing, switching up the band whenever he wanted, and bringing Zetro Souza back without warning. Others accused him of neglecting Exodus while pursuing Slayer. However, few were aware that Gary continued to write songs for Exodus late into the night while performing for hundreds of millions of people with Slayer. Not for fame, not for wealth. But just for one purpose. He had no idea how to stop. Gary Holt was the focal point of Exodus for years, yet the media never paid attention to him. He did not cause controversy. He refrained from expressing rash opinions. Public outrage, however, erupted when he appeared on stage with Slayer wearing a Kill the Kardashians shirt. It was interpreted by some as a scathing indictment on trash media culture. Others denounced it as a call to violence. Gary didn't answer. No explanations, no regrets. Like every other time, Holt chose to remain silent in order to survive in a world that was more reactionary and noisy than ever. Gary Holt never learned how to accomplish one thing: give up. He persisted in spite of criticism, miscommunication, and deteriorating health. Perhaps the biggest tragedy in his life was that Holt continued to tour, write, change strings, and pack pedals after every gig as though it were his last, while others retired, secured book deals, and made appearances on talk programs. Gary Holt continues to be the thinner, more worn-out man who still holds onto his guitar like it's his only weapon in a field where artists sometimes give up on what they once created. Perhaps, just perhaps, since he doesn't back down, all the suffering in the world has decided to find him. Personal life: although Gary Holt is one of the most fierce guitarists in thrash metal, you won't find him wallowing in the backstage mayhem of jeers, ladies, and the constant craziness when the stage lights go down and the drums stop beating. His wife is waiting in his room with a plate of cold food and a note from his daughter, who brought it from across the nation. Instead, you will witness him gently unplug his cords, fold his stage clothes neatly, and head back to his room. Holt resides with his longtime wife, Lisa Holt, who is always by his side during every tour but never speaks to the media or takes the stage. The woman next to Gary has remained the same in a world where bandmates switch up all the time and reunions end after a few months. He received treatment from Lisa throughout his COVID-19 infection, who also prepared his first dinner after the Slayer tour concluded and assisted him in leaving the stage when he was too tired to move. They have 2 kids, and Gary frequently, although not in a boastful or sentimental manner, posts about his daughter Emily Holt on social media. but with subdued articles about her childhood, their time apart, and the holidays she missed due to tour obligations. He previously revealed that the things he missed most in life, birthdays and milestones he only saw in pictures, were more regrettable than incomplete albums. Outside of music, Holt only enjoys cooking and raising animals. He keeps little animals that are occasionally useless to the world, such dogs, cats, and chickens. They represent survival and uncommon tranquility to Gary. He once wrote, "It knows the safest place in the house," beside a picture of a cat resting on his amplifier. Like tweaking his pedals before a show, Gary Holt barbecues barbecue at his California suburban house, which is situated between a little garden and a mini studio. He doesn't smoke, drink excessively, or follow the harmful pathways that are so prevalent in the metal scene. While his peers have died alone in hotel rooms or struggled through treatment, Gary somehow manages to stay sober and sane, not because he's stronger, but rather because he decided against going down that route. He used to say that although I'm not perfect, I know what kills people the slowest and steer clear of it. Holt's simplicity isn't a staged portrayal. It's how he's managed to stay himself through all the years, blood, lights, and screaming. Gary Holt lives to be remembered, but he lives to be remembered even when he isn't holding a guitar. He has never pitched a biopic, published a biography, or appeared on a big talk show. However, one line might be sufficient if someone were to share his story one day. Even as the world collapsed around him, he played right, lived right, and maintained his home. Present life and legacy. Gary Holt celebrated his 60th birthday in 2024. This is the age of retirement for many metal performers of his generation, a time to revisit past glory through well-packaged reunion tours, music fairs, or memoirs. Gary, however, is not a memory person. He still practices left hand runs every morning, writes riffs, changes the pickups on his guitars, and roars as though Exodus had just started. Holt returned to devote himself fully to Exodus when Slayer broke up. Critics gave Persona non grata, which was published in 2021 during the epidemic, high marks for both its technical prowess and its somber, politically motivated lyrics. At 60, very few metal bands put out new albums, and even fewer were able to maintain the unadulterated energy they had 40 years before. Gary did it. No market games, no PR. Just raw honesty and music. He currently resides in California in a house filled with vintage comic books, amps, and cats. The majority of his time is spent writing songs, repairing guitars, sharing pictures of barbecue on Instagram, and communicating with fans in the most straightforward manner possible by responding to every comment, sometimes with his signature middle finger emoji. Even though he's not the kind of rock star who actively seeks to inspire, he manages to do so without ever trying. There is no reformer like Gary Holt. Although he did not create thrash metal, he preserved it in its purest, unadulterated form. Holt is the epitome of a genre characterized by defiance, insurrection, and a refusal to compromise. Holt is referred to as the line keeper, whilst other great guitarists are called icons, masters, or gods. The number of children who learnt his riffs in garages is a better indicator of his impact than record sales. We wouldn't exist without being bound by blood or the tempo of the damned, according to how many bands today, not by Billboard charts. Holt doesn't advocate any one philosophy, but his calm, modest, and unflinching lifestyle serves as an example for budding artists, showing them that creating art doesn't always equate to success. Sometimes it's sufficient to simply survive and keep the fire going. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame does not include him. He's not a Grammy winner. A documentary about him does not exist. However, any metalhead who has actually experienced the music, that is, who has listened, screamed, and lost their voice in the mosh pit, is aware of this fact. One of the only people who has never betrayed the riff is Gary Holt. Gary Holt is the one thing that cannot be purchased in a time when everything can be purchased with views, likes, and discounts. Perhaps that is the most significant legacy he leaves behind. How do you feel about Gary Holt's nearly 50-year journey from garage guitarist to Exodus' immortal spirit and Slayer's torchbearer? What most impresses you? Is it his devotion, his musical perseverance, or his unwavering refusal to make concessions? Leave a comment below with your opinions. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you think artists like Gary Holt should be given more credit. To continue learning about the legends who live, play, and remain genuine. Thank you for viewing. I'll see you in the upcoming video.